Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. This is the 111th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe to a premium membership and get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write 3 columns a week for the Boston Sports Journal, so go to bostonsportsjournal.com. Check all of my work out there as well. Let's thank our sponsors real quick before we get into the nitty-gritty of this podcast. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of picking you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll right in. For instance, Jarren Duran, you can do statistics up and down the board. He is crushing it for the Red Sox right now, MVP of the All-Star game. I think he's got 12 triples already this season, which is basically like only halfway over, which is amazing, sick. It speaks to his athleticism, but it also speaks to statistically how he's just running the gamut of all these different stats. So I think that's a great kind of guy to use for Prize Picks. But bottom line is it's fun and pretty simple. You download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Let's download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Let's also thank Game Time. Game Time is the place to go to get your MLB tickets, to get your Fenway tickets with the Boston Red Sox, who are doing perfectly fine this year. They've certainly got some players like Jarren Duran to watch, so why wouldn't you want to pay some money to see them? Flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing, seat views, the lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That sounds like a pretty damn good deal. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. We are going to do a mailbag episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We are in the Death Valley of hockey news, as we like to call it. The middle of June to the middle of August, basically in the NHL, is where everybody goes to their cottages in Canada. All the executives, all the scouts, all the players, all the movers and shakers, all the coaches. Everybody just goes away and basically shuts it down for the entire month. Gets on their boat on the lake, goes fishing, goes golfing, takes their vacation they've been waiting all year to go on, gets married. A lot of players do that right about this time of year. All of that stuff is happening because there is pretty much nothing going on in the hockey world, and that's basically where we're at right now with the Boston Bruins and with the NHL. There's just the only thing right now is Jeremy Swayman's contract. We'll get more on that later, where he hasn't signed. Nothing is going on there. But everybody else has been signed. You're not seeing really a lot of trades. You're not seeing a lot of free agent signings. You're not seeing much of anything right now. So it's the perfect time to answer some of your questions. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. And the first one, as I always do when I send out the tweet looking for questions, I look for Bruins, NHL, and pop culture questions, all in that order. And the first question is from Frederick underscore MVP on Twitter. And he's got a little bit of each question, which I think is phenomenal. The first question is, what recent sports-related documentary or series has caught your attention and why it's worth a watch? Now, I know this is a hockey podcast, and I cover hockey, and I cover the NHL, so a lot of the other sports, maybe you're not watching as many documentaries or TV series on these other sports and things in the sporting world. There is a good series right now on, I think it's FX. You can watch it on Hulu. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's about the LA Clippers and it's about Donald Sterling, and it's got Lawrence Fishburne playing Doc Rivers. And it's basically about the whole saga where Donald Sterling got bounced from ownership, and sort of it's a dramatization of that whole thing. Like, that series is pretty good. Donald Sterling is played by none other than Ed O'Neill. Yes, Al Bundy plays Donald Sterling, so that is actually pretty entertaining too. And it was good. There wasn't a ton of basketball in it. It was more about the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, but there was enough to keep it interesting for people that love sports. In that vein, though, I felt like it was a poor man's version of Winning Time, which was on HBO. It had 2 seasons, and you can go on HBO Max and watch it right now if you missed it the first time. But it's all about the Lakers dynasty and the rise of the Lakers. And you're sitting there saying to yourself, why the hell would I want to watch about the rise of the Lakers dynasty? Well, there's a lot of stuff about the Celtics and Larry Bird and Red Auerbach and all that good stuff in there too. They actually have what they called, it was a origin episode of the villain of the series, which was Larry Bird. And they basically go through his whole story. The guy that plays Larry Bird is excellent. That whole episode is really, really good. It goes through a bunch of stuff from his history, including him walking onto Indiana State in jeans and torching everybody in a pickup game before he decided to go to Indiana State after he famously had dropped out and left Indiana and Bobby Knight. So all that stuff is really great. If you love Larry Bird, if you love the Celtics, it's worth a watch just because of that. But the guys that played Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all the different players. Norm Nixon's son actually played Norm Nixon in it. What's the guy's name? I can't think of the guy's name, the actor, but he played, the one that played Pat Riley was excellent too. So I would check it out. John C. Reilly is in it playing Dr. Buss, Jerry Buss. So that is part is interesting too. But I thought the series was well done. The music was great. The direction was great. The writing was excellent. The characters were all fleshed out. I know Jerry West was really pissed at his portrayal, and it was kind of unfair at the beginning. It seemed like they were taking shots at him a little bit, and I can understand why he wasn't happy. And I remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I think, writing on his Substack that he didn't like the way the series went and how everybody was portrayed as well. But when you take it for a TV series that's not quite that's not quite a documentary, so it's not 100% truth. Some stuff has been stretched and really sort of like fabricated to a degree for dramatic purposes. I think, get sucked in and find it really interesting. I grew up in the 80s in the middle of the Lakers-Celtics rivalry. I was very invested in it as a kid. I watched all those games. And like everybody else of that era, we would turn down the TV and turn up the radio broadcast and listen to Johnny Most while we were watching the games on TV. But I lived through all that stuff. So it was really interesting to watch it from this perspective. And I think it's worth, for anybody else that didn't catch it, it got canceled after 2 seasons. They were going to make more, so they kind of wrapped up the series pretty quickly at the end of the 2nd season, which actually ended with the Celtics winning a championship and the Lakers really being at the sort of down note. They called it like the Empire Strikes Back part of the series, where the heroes, the Lakers, are really at the lowest point. And basically I won't give it away, but like they're all at their low point at the end of the 2nd season with the Celtics winning a championship. And they were hoping to have a 3rd season where they were going to show how they rebounded from that and continued to build. And instead they had to do it, really quickly in like, 5-10 minutes of like sort of, written lines at the end of the series, kind of telling what happened to everybody. But aside from the abbreviated ending, I would say it's very much worth watching. And you can, like I said, stream it on HBO Max. Winning Time, about the Celtics and the Lakers. I highly recommend that. That's probably the best thing I've seen recently. I saw there's a Pete Rose documentary or something on HBO Max. I haven't gotten a chance to watch that yet, so I may like that as well. And I always love the 30 for 30s. Like all of them are great. I have some personal favorites. Obviously, the one about the 2004 Red Sox Yankees was really good. There's one about Lakers, Celtics, Bird, Magic that's really good. Bunch of ones that are really good. I like the I Hate Christian Laettner one because I obviously was in high school around the time Laettner was playing at Duke, and everybody hated Christian Laettner and Duke back then. So that was a fun one to watch as well. And I learned a lot about him. I didn't know he was a working class kid from Buffalo. I thought he was a rich kid that went and played basketball at Duke. And I guess that was the perception of him, and it was completely wrong. So a lot about that documentary I actually kind of enjoyed. So I would recommend Winning Time, though, if you're going to try to watch something and you haven't watched it yet about the Lakers and the Celtics. Now with Major League Baseball in full swing with the Boston Red Sox actually doing okay, sort of fighting for a playoff spot. certainly better than I think anybody would have expected going into this season. Now's a great time to use Prize Picks. If you're a Red Sox fan and if you're a baseball fan, with basketball and hockey having wrapped up, Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun and pretty simple. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. I mean, where can you go wrong? You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every single week, from lowering select players' stats projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. All kinds of good stuff going on right there. Prize Picks is also available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. So if you want to get on board the Jarren Duran train with the Boston Red Sox and start loading up on his stats, Tristan Casas, when he comes back and starts hitting, all the Red Sox, if you want to get on board with them, just get it done with Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. NHL question next from Frederick _MVP. With the new rule changes this season, which team is most likely to benefit and how? I mean, is there anything really significant about the rule changes that you feel like is going to benefit any one team? I don't know. I'm going to skip that one because I just don't see the rule changes. They're subtle. I don't see the rule changes really benefiting anybody tremendously. At least not off the top of my head. I may come back to that one when I have a guest later on down the line, so I may reserve. And I may actually ask this question again when I've got a couple guests on next time, because I like this question anyway, the three-pronged attack. But I'm going to reserve that one and sort of pass that one for now and maybe think about it a little bit more, because I don't really sense that any team is going to get a tremendous amount of benefit from the rule changes. I will tell you one thing that I did think was interesting. This isn't about rule changes, but I did think it's interesting finding out that Dallas has actually got the worst deal as far as travel in the NHL these days. I think everybody assumed it was Vancouver or Seattle, and certainly Vancouver had it tough before Seattle was made an NHL team, before expansion went there. But I guess that's changed things now for Vancouver quite a bit. And Dallas actually has the worst travel. You knew it was going to be a Western Conference team because there's a lot more far-reaching teams in the Western Conference. But I thought it would be a Pacific Northwest team. I did not think it was going to be Dallas, even though I guess that makes sense, them being in Texas and pretty much far away from everybody. But that's the kind of thing I want to see rule changes done to sort of mitigate is the travel, the Western Conference having to like fly all over the place and really having it a lot worse than the East. I think that the East and West teams should be playing less against each other each season. Like, for instance, you play every team, every Eastern Conference team plays every Western Conference team twice during the year, once at home and once on the road. So the Bruins play the Edmonton Oilers once at TD Garden and once out in Edmonton every single season. And like, I understand that for sales ticket purposes, like, because every town wants to have Connor McDavid, and the Edmonton Oilers come to town to sell tickets. Some need it, like, you know, the Florida teams, some of the non-traditional teams, I think, need that. Arizona Coyotes moving to Utah now, like teams like that, I think need it. Teams like the Boston Bruins do not need it. You know, there's also a lot of NHL teams that don't necessarily, that you could go Connor McDavid coming to Boston every other year instead of every year, and that would be perfectly fine. And I think if you did that, if you eliminated some of those Western Conference games, it would lighten the load travel-wise on teams like the Dallas Stars. And I want to see more divisional rival games. I want to see the Bruins play the Canadiens more. I want to see the Bruins play the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Florida Panthers, the Toronto Maple Leafs more. I want to see him playing all those teams like 5 times a year or more if you can do it. But I want to go back sort of to like when I first started covering the NHL, the Bruins were playing the Canadiens, I want to say it was like 8 times a year. I want to see it get back to that point where they're playing everybody in their division a lot and really breeding the rivalry, breeding the hatred, building all of that up before they face each other in the playoffs when they have the divisional rivalries or the divisional playoffs set up and you're playing everybody out of your division a couple of times. I want to see that happen more. And I want to see that during the regular season rather than them playing all these teams they're barely going to see and traveling all around the country to every single Western Conference city. So, maybe there's something that can be done with that, with the schedule makers in the short term. Certainly would be cheaper too for the NHL owners, which I think they're interested in. The bottom line there, if you're not traveling as much to the West Conference and you're traveling to all the teams that are closer to you, I think it's in their best interest as well fiscally to do something like that. And it's less, air miles, less fuel used, like better for the environment, all that stuff. There's a lot of arguments you can make, better for the players too, obviously. Less travel, less time on planes, more sleep, more rest, more practice time, all that stuff. So I wish that's something they would talk about as a rule change. Forget about like teams benefiting from some like subtle, like, way that they're going to call penalties, interpret penalties different this year or whatever. All right, Bruins question. Can you evaluate the Bruins Swayman situation? Yes, I can evaluate the Bruins Swayman situation. I've explained this a few times. It hasn't changed much. I don't think it's going to change much before. Like, once you've hit this point where there's clearly a bit of an impasse, where the two sides aren't coming to an agreement, have not come to an agreement. The only thing they agreed on was that they did not want to go to arbitration, both Jeremy Swayman's camp and the Bruins camp, which smartly so, I think. That was a commitment from both sides that we're going to get a contract done and we're really going to commit to it. We're not going to force the other side into arbitration, which they could have done, which could have, like, obviously Jeremy Swayman didn't want to go there again. He had hard feelings about last time, didn't want to experience that again. I totally understand that. But, like, the Bruins had every right to take him there and try to get another cheap year or two out of him, or cheaper year or two out of him. And certainly they would have in arbitration. Like, his numbers are not great for a goaltender. And this is where the problem lies. All right. He had a very good season this past year, was named to the All-Star game, was the number one goalie in the playoffs. Like, he did some really good things. There's no question about it. And the performance he had for about a month in the Stanley Cup playoffs was like, nonpareil. It was outstanding. Like, there's no question. He answered a lot of questions. He played so well that they felt comfortable trading Linus Ullmark. Like, there was a lot of great things going on in the postseason, but it was only a month. Okay. There's no comparable to Jeremy Swayman in the NHL as far as goalies go that is getting paid more than $7 million a year. Definitely nobody comparable to Jeremy Swayman where he is right now in his career that is getting paid $8 million a year. So everybody automatically assumes he's going to get 8 years and $64 million, and the Bruins should pay him like a number one because he, had a good month in the playoffs and he had a pretty good season where he was named to the All-Star game. But, like, the bottom line is Jeremy Swayman has not started more than 44 games in an NHL season. Jeremy Swayman has never been a Vezina Trophy finalist. Jeremy Swayman has never been considered one of the top 3 goalies in the league at any point in his career. There's no goalie that has not even had one season of proving he's a number one goalie with the accompanying workload, playing 60 games a year, playing 55 to 60 games a year. You got to do that before you can get paid like a number one goalie. He has not done that yet. And that's where the problem comes in for the negotiations. It's kind of like real estate with sports player contracts. You got to find comparables. Just like in real estate, you've got to find comparable properties to get the proper value for your house. In player contract negotiations, you have to find comparable players that are getting paid the same that you are in order to win your argument and get the contract that you want from the team. And the tough part for Jeremy Swayman's camp is there are no comparables to Jeremy Swayman based on what he's done in the NHL to date that got these massive 8-year, $8 million plus deals. Like, the closest comparable to Jeremy Swayman that I could find was UC Saros before he signed his deal that he just signed for like $7.5 million or whatever it was on a long-term deal. He had previously been splitting time with Pekka Rinne, and he got paid 3 years, $15 million. with very similar numbers to Jeremy Swayman, having split time with Pekka Rinne, just like Jeremy Swayman had split time with Linus Ullmark. And then 3 years later now, down the line, now Saros gets the huge deal that we're talking about Jeremy Swayman potentially getting right now. Like, you don't want to sign Jeremy Swayman to a 3-year contract and let him potentially be able to walk away in free agency where it's going to cost you even more. That, I think, would be a mistake. But just the same, I also think the Bruins cannot give him 8 years and $64 million based on where he is right now, having never even played one season as a number one goalie with that kind of physical and mental workload. And then being able to have something in the tank in the playoffs after you've played that many games and played at a high level. You know, you've got to have a really good season or two where you're like top 5 in the Vezina Trophy voting, where you play 55 to 60 games and maintain your numbers, you know, where you prove that you can handle the workload of being a number one guy more than like just a month during the playoffs. And that's where I think the difficulty is right now is, and I think it was Dan Rosen on NHL.com. He had a mailbag and it was written questions. And he tried to say that like Connor Hellebuck and like a bunch of other goalies were comparables in Saros right now, after he's played 60 plus games a couple of years in a row, were comparables to Jeremy Swayman. And because they traded Ullmark, the Bruins believe he's a number one goalie, so he should be paid like a number one goalie. That is not how contracts work. That is not how it works. And granted, the Bruins are in a tough spot right now because they traded Ullmark and their leverage is kind of gone. Because, you know, they have Korpisalo and Brandon Bussey, and they're not going to want to start the season with those two in net as your number one and number two or 1 and 1A. You know, this team is built to have elite goaltending, and they need an elite goaltender like Jeremy Swayman. They need to get the same elite level of goaltending they got from Swayman and Ullmark last year. So they need to keep him happy. They need to get him in training camp and be ready to go in the regular season. But at the same time, I think if Swayman's camp is pushing for 8 years and $64 million, I don't think they can get there because I don't think there's a comparable getting paid that in the NHL, a comparable goalie. And that's what makes, I think, this a difficult negotiation, what makes this hard as far as trying to find a landing spot for the contract and what you're going to pay Swayman. And all that stuff. I think that's where we're at right now is it's kind of an impasse because Swayman probably wants more than he should want or has earned to this point or sort of like deserves. And the Bruins don't want to offend him. The Bruins don't want to lowball him and piss him off. But at the same time, the Bruins don't want to create a situation where they're paying somebody 8 years and $64 million that's never played more than 44 games in the NHL, that's never been a Vezina Trophy finalist, and all of a sudden he becomes a comparable to all these other NHL goalies that are like in the same situation where they can be like, Swayman got paid $8 million a year. This guy should be getting paid $8 million a year. And that's like a way to really like create inflationary contracts and make everything go through the roof. So you're not going to see the Bruins do that. You're not going to see a team that's owned by Jeremy Jacobs all of a sudden sign this super inflationary deal to a guy like Jeremy Swayman. That's what I believe anyway, just given his track record right now. So what's the middle ground? Maybe they can pay him. Maybe they sign him to like a 5-year deal for $7 million a year or something like that. Maybe they can find something in the middle where it's not quite the super long-term deal, but where they are buying out some years of free agency, and you know they could probably justify paying him $7 million a year instead of $8, because he's on the way up, and you can, I think, stretch it a little bit to $7 just to like give him some love and make him feel like you believe in him and that he's the number one guy. But I think if you start getting into the $8 million range for a guy like that, where he's getting paid like he's won Vezina trophies and that he's played 60 plus games and that he's been a workhorse before he's done that, I think that's problematic on a lot of different levels, especially if he proves or he shows you that he can't do it once, the going gets tough and he really gets pushed and he's playing, every game for 2 or 3 weeks straight and he can't maintain his performance. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Jeremy Swayman's the number one goalie. I think he's going to be excellent with the Bruins. But from a business perspective, I just don't think as the GM of the team, you can make that much of a leap with a huge contract like that before you've at least seen the goalie go out and prove it by playing all those games and playing at a high level and being that workhorse number one goalie. He just hasn't done that yet for a longer stretch than doing it in the playoffs for a month. So, he was brilliant, obviously, but he needs to do it for more than that. All right, so I hope that answers your question. Hi, Joe. My favorite Bruin of all time, Ray Bourn, celebrated a birthday this week. Could either you or your guests please share a favorite story about Ray that might not be well known to Bruins fans? Well, and that's from Roger Perry. Thank you, Roger. I am going to also bring this up to Mick, I think, and maybe Mark Diver, maybe Kevin Paul Dupont. I think he's going to come on this coming week. So we're going to get all those guys on to tell their Ray Bourn stories. Mine is probably not as interesting as the other ones. I didn't cover Ray Bourn, so I know him. I mean, the best story I have about Ray Bourn, personally, is playing against him in Milan Lucic's Celebrity All-Star game, softball game. And this is probably like 2011-ish, 2012-ish. And I was playing left field. He was up at bat, and he's a very good softball player, a good right athlete, obviously. And I think I don't know if he did this on purpose. He friggin' crushed a line drive right down the left field line and forced my fat ass to chase after the ball and run around and try to get it. And he ended up legging out a triple, Papa Bear Ray Bourn, because it took me so long to track down the ball and get it back to the infield because he had smoked it and it started rattling around the wall. And this was at the Spinners Field up in Lowell. And I think he had a huge smile on his face after he ended up at third base, legging out a triple because he'd hit one to me out in left field. So that's probably my best Ray Bourn story personally. But I also love his restaurant, Tresca. I love his son, Chris, from his time playing with the Bruins. I had some great conversations with him. You know, Ray was around the team a little bit more. He'd be in Providence when Chris was down there as well. And he was like in, I believe it was Hartford when his son Ryan played for the Wolfpack too. So you'd see him at those games a lot. Just a great guy, outstanding, classy guy, soft-spoken, but was like very friendly if, you know, you wanted to talk to him about anything. Exactly the kind of ambassador you would want for the Boston Bruins and the kind of guy that would be a captain for a long time and a Hall of Famer. So class individual. But I hope some of the guys that covered him, who we will have on at a later time, will be able to tell you some better stories. So that will suffice for now. Just imagining me chasing his smoked ball down the left field line in a Celebrity All-Star game where, you know, we had a cast of thousands out there. Lenny Clark was the pitcher. Toucher and Rich played in one of those games. Tuukka Rask played shortstop. I don't think he'd ever played softball before in his life, and he was playing shortstop. There was some pretty funny stuff that happened in those games. I think Daniel Paille got mad at me because I caught his fly ball that he hit to right field at one point. There's all kinds of fun stuff going on with those games. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about them at some point. Maybe we'll have some people on that played in one of those celebrity softball games. But that's the best story I can give you for his birthday. Hopefully we'll get some better ones out of Mick and Kevin Paul Dupont and those guys. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time, the Red Sox, Fenway Park. Jarren Duran putting on a show at the MLB All-Star Game. So you may want to dig into your pocket and actually like spend some money on some Red Sox tickets based on Jarren Duran and the season he's having. This is one of those seasons where I think you're going to want to watch because he's in the middle of putting something together pretty special. You're going to say you were in the stands and you saw Jarren Duran like do something crazy when you were actually watching one of the games at Fenway. So go to Game Time. Last minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of getting Red Sox tickets at Fenway this summer with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create the account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thoughts on Bruins Merkulov and the narrative from many that he could be a solid option for second line right wing out of camp. I have a hard time believing he'd be considered with absolutely no experience on the right side nor any trial period recently in Providence. Thanks. From Black and Gold 277. And he actually went the extra mile of putting down where he played positionally. NHL, 4 games at center. 23-24 in Providence, 1 game at left wing, 66 at center. 22-23, 21 games at left wing, 46 at center. 21-22, 2 games at left wing, 6 at center. And look, it's at some level it is interesting that he's only played left wing and center. But like, I got to be honest with you, like, I think any player can adjust to playing left wing, right wing. Yes, you got to play on your backhand more if you're playing on your offside. Yes, it changes the way you do certain things and it makes it a little more difficult at times, certainly on the breakout and pick pucks off the board. And, sometimes accepting passes too can be more of a challenge if you're on your offside. But like, guys have done it. Jake DeBrusk did it and made the transition very well. Especially skill guys, I think, that already have good hand-eye and have good stick skills, good hands. I think those kind of guys will be able to do it pretty seamlessly and pretty quickly. And like you say, no trial period. Isn't that what preseason is? Isn't that a trial period? Wouldn't you get looks at him at right wing during practice and during games in a trial period during training camp if you were going to try him out there potentially during the regular season? So, like, to say it's a narrative, not really. Like Don Sweeney mentioned Merkulov, mentioned Riley Duran, and mentioned Fabian Lysell by name when we were talking about a potential spot being open alongside Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand. And maybe Charlie Coyle moves over to right wing and you have Merkulov playing center. I suppose that's a possibility as well. But like, is it a narrative if the GM actually mentioned his name as potentially being a candidate? Is it still a narrative then? I don't think so. So, bottom line with the Merkulov stuff, like if his only shot is going to be to play right wing and his only top 6 shot is going to be to play right wing with Brad Marchand and Charlie Coyle, don't you think they're going to look at him there? Don't you think he's going to want to look there? Especially if before, when he was brought up as a center, it was like in a 4th line situation where he was miscast last year and really didn't do much of anything except from hit the post with 1 shot. Wasn't really distinguishable or noticeable at all. And like, to his defense, I think he was much worried about it being a good 2-way center, a good defensive player. And that kind of lessened his offensive impact and what he could do there. So wouldn't you want him to get a top 6 look at, a place where the Bruins need him? Like, and like I said, trial period is training camp. Like you're going to have like almost a month to give him reps there, to get look at it in the preseason, to get look at it in practice, to take a look and see if it might work. And maybe it won't, and he'll be out of the running. But I just think, I think he's been thrown into the mix by the GM, and he was mentioned as a potential candidate. So like, why wouldn't he be discussed at that point? Like, I don't know. I don't understand where the sort of like defensiveness about it, or where the sort of, that couldn't possibly happen because he never played a game there in Providence. Well, that, you know what? Sometimes you need it at the NHL level to play a certain position, and they get looks at it, especially in training camp, where they have all that time to experiment with things and play around. And you take a look at it and see how he looks. Why wouldn't you? Like, and maybe it goes no further than there. And that's what's likely to happen is if he's really uncomfortable at right wing, they'll short circuit it quick and they'll take a look at it and be like, this isn't really working. He's more of a center or a left wing, and it's just going to be problematic for him. But like, why rule him out now when you haven't even looked at it? Like, that seems more sort of like head scratching to me than, potentially throwing him in there and see how he looks. So it's an interesting point. I'll give you that. But just because a player the last few years hasn't played the right wing in Providence does not mean he's not going to get looks at the NHL level with the Boston Bruins. So I appreciate the email though, and the question, and I think it's a good one. And I think it's a big year for Merkulov, and Lysell, both of them. They both have established themselves in the AHL as solid players and as offensive playmakers and guys that can make things happen. And now it's really up to them to make it happen at the NHL level and to make that next step to show that they can cross over and make that jump into being effective NHL players, and sort of doing what Mason Lohrei did last year. And, somebody had asked me before, like, what would you consider a successful season for Fabian Lysell? And it wouldn't necessarily be like 20 goals, 50 points, like whatever. It would be sticking with the Bruins for most of the year. It would be staying at the NHL level. It would be playing with Brad Marchand and Charlie Coyle, and them having enough trust in him that they want him to stick around and that they're going to keep him there. It would be something like that. It would be like doing what Johnny Beecher and Mason Lohrei did last year and really kind of establishing themselves at the NHL level and sticking around the team for most of the year. And even if he gets bounced once or twice to the AHL and he, has a handful of games here or there, but if like either Merkulov or Lysell spends the majority of the season at the NHL level playing for the Boston Bruins, I really feel like that's the kind of forward progress you want to see from those players at this point. And that the offensive numbers and more of the production, more of the top 6 reps, and more of the, trust will start to like be shown towards them as they establish themselves and as they can prove that they could be a useful piece at the NHL level for a team that's, good, that's playoff caliber, that should be Stanley Cup caliber this year with the addition of Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm, as well as, Mac Jones and some of the other players that the Bruins brought on board. So, it's going to be an interesting year. I do think in a lot of ways, I certainly think Lysell is probably going to be looked at much longer and harder for this right wing spot than Merkulov would, just because I think it's tailor-made for him. And really, it's kind of the circle of life in the NHL that Jake DeBrusk was a first-round pick and ends up moving on in free agency because the Bruins didn't want to pay that kind of money or term to him. And now the guy they took a few years ago, right wing in the first round, is kind of at that NHL crossroads right now. And that's sort of the circle of life in player draft and development, is you draft those guys knowing that they're going to end up replacing veterans that you can't afford anymore. And the Bruins are going to take a hit offensively with Jake DeBrusk not around anymore, because they're going to miss his speed and skill and production. And he didn't, put up massive numbers over the course of his career, but like he was a guy that put defensemen on their heels. He was a guy that was feared offensively that he could create. And certainly when he was really feeling it and playing with speed and the skating game was going, he could make things happen, and he was dynamic. So they need another dynamic force in that top 6 to create offense and to score. And Merkulov could certainly, Lysell could certainly be that guy if he continues to make the forward progress that he did last year in Providence, where he had some ups and downs, but, for the most part, ended the year on a high note. So that's another sort of, to your point, I think it's more Lysell than Merkulov probably being looked at in that spot. And I'm interested to see how Riley Duran's going to fit into all this, because it was interesting. I thought that Don Sweeney mentioned Riley Duran along with those other 2 names as young players that could surprise in camp or get looks. I think he's more of a bottom 6 than a top 6 candidate on the wing. But maybe, he becomes a bottom 6 guy that ends up helping push Trent Frederick or Morgan Geekie to that right wing spot, because I know they're going to get a lot of looks there as well. But the bottom line is, I think there will be a lot of candidates, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that the Bruins are going to look at and give reps to in that spot. And ultimately, it's going to be how they behave and perform, how they produce, how Brad Marchand and Charlie Coyle feel about those players playing alongside them. I think there's going to have to be a lot of trust there, and they're going to have a lot of feedback and a lot of say into who's playing with them, and don't underrate that. But at the end of the day, why wouldn't you want one of your young players to step in and be able to do that job, and at least give them a long look before you go out and, sign a guy or trade for a guy at the trade deadline and have to give up assets for him and, devote cap space to him as well. So it's going to be interesting. And I know there's a lot of opinions about this, and there certainly will be a lot of curious eyes watching in training camp when all these players get looks with Coyle and Marchand and get reps and to see who does what. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on guys like Merkulov and Lysell to make that jump because they're at that point in their careers where they have to go from prospects to established NHL players, or otherwise they won't be prospects anymore within a year or 2. It happens that fast. So should be interesting, though. Thank you very much for the question. I believe that was from Mark Allred from Black and Gold. Love his podcast, love his work, but he was Black and Gold 277 on Twitter. So thank you for the question. Let's also thank our sponsors real quick. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. So Jaron Duran, maybe it's triples, maybe it's hits, all that stuff. He's a stats monster. He just puts up stats up and down. He's got extra base hits in all categories, stolen bases, hits, average, anything you can want. But it's fun and pretty simple. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Let's also thank Game Time. Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets at Fenway Park with the Red Sox. You want Red Sox tickets this summer? Go to Game Time. Talk to my friends there. They will take care of you. Last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And my favorite, lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, that's it for this week's Pucks with Haggs mailbag edition. Some of those mailbag questions, like I said, I'm going to save for Mick next week or Dupes or whoever you have on, because I love some of those questions. I want to get other people's takes. But we will be back to our regularly scheduled Pucks with Haggs podcast with guests next week. So thanks for listening. See you at the rink.